In the summer of 1816, the world seemed wrapped in a cloak of shadow. The great volcano Tambora, half a world away, had erupted with such force that its ashes veiled the sun itself. Across Europe, the skies hung heavy with soot and storm. Crops failed, rivers swelled, and famine spread like a ghost over the land. The people called it the year without a summer. Each day dawned grey, each night pressed down with thunder. The very air seemed bewitched, and it was in that strange season on the shores of Lake Geneva that a small gathering took shelter from the storm. A borrowed villa, perched above the dark waters, became their refuge. Villa Diodati. Here, candles burned in every room, their flames bending and flickering beneath the restless breath of the storm. Thunder rolled like a great drum across the mountains, and lightning carved the night sky into shards of silver. Here gathered the restless and the brilliant. Lord Byron, exiled from England, infamous for his scandal and his genius, stalked the halls with fire in his eyes. Percy Shelley, only 23, aflame with radical thought and unquiet dreams, paced and spoke of revolution and spirit. With him was Mary Godwin. Mary, not yet 19, carrying in her heart both grief and fierce imagination. She had known loss, and she had known love that burned bright against the world's disapproval. At her side was her stepsister, Claire Clairmont, and Byron's physician, John Polidori, whose quiet observations held more ambition than his companions guessed. The storm outside gave them no peace. For days, rain lashed the shutters. The lake churned dark and wild. In that uneasy confinement, Byron proposed a contest, that each of them should tell a ghost story, a tale to chill the blood, to pass the nights while thunder shook the glass. They spoke of phantoms and revenants, of the dead who would not stay in their graves. They whispered of science, of sparks and currents, of electricity's uncanny power to twitch the limbs of corpses. And it was there, in that house of storm and shadow, that Mary dreamed. She dreamed of a pale student, bent low over a lifeless form. She saw the trembling hand, the sudden spark, the shudder of something that should not be moving, and yet did. In the quiet after lightning, she saw death stirred into life, and she woke with terror in her veins, her heart beating like the storm outside. But she also woke in awe, for she had glimpsed not only a nightmare, but a story. Out of her vision would come Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, a tale not merely of science and horror, but of creation and its consequence. A story of ambition, responsibility, and the shadow each of us casts. For every age since, her vision has lingered with us. It asks, who is the true creator, and who the true creature? Where is the boundary between man and monster? It is a story of storms, of fire and of ice. But above all, it is a story of us. The mountain tore open the sky, and ash sailed the winds like a black tide. Sunlight thinned to a pall, turning days into smudged twilight. Across Europe, the year's calendar blurred, as if time itself had dimmed. Cold crept into June. Storms wandered like lost spirits, and summer forgot its name. Merchants cursed the dim light that spoiled their wares, and sailors read the horizon like a failing prayer. Painters found only grey in their palettes. Church bells tolled for reasons no one could name. The air itself felt haunted, a curtain between the living and the dream of warmth. Letters carried rumors faster than caravans. They spoke of red dawns and blue suns, of skies the color of bruises. The strangest colors drew the deepest fears. When the firmament looked wounded, men imagined punishment, and women whispered of omens walking the fields. Cattle gathered close to barns as if the wind held wolves. Flocks pressed together, uneasy at noon. Wildflowers failed their appointment with the hill, and vines forgot their grip. In taverns, voices lowered around candles, as if speaking too loudly might exhaust the small circle of light. No one saw Tambora from their doorstep, but all felt its breath. The volcano's hand stretched farther than maps dared. It closed around the patience of nations and squeezed. And in that pressure, something in the human mind cracked, letting superstition and vision pour through. Wheat bowed its empty heads. Fields yellowed too soon, then blackened in rain like extinguished wicks. Bread grew thin, then dear. Mothers cut slices thinner still, learning to divide hunger into equal shares. In markets, silence was a price, and coins sounded like sorrow on the stall. Horses stumbled for lack of fodder. Roads inherited their ribs. A dog's bark could start an argument, the echo of appetite wearing masks. Priests prayed for weather that would not listen. Physicians prescribed air that would not clear. Even the river's voice sounded like a rumor of thirst. Men blamed comets, women counted miscarriages, children learned the arithmetic of want. Smoke rose from hearths like reluctant ghosts, unwilling to reveal what little supper hid within. Storms rehearsed themselves daily, their thunder repeating old sermons about fragile flesh and stubborn hope. Night came early and stayed too long, pouring itself through shutters like ink. Candles kept vigil over ledgers that refused to balance. Debts multiplied, and futures shrank to the next crust. Between cough and cough, families named the saints. Between prayer and prayer, they named their dead. And yet the strange beauty of the world persisted. A violet dusk painted roofs like bruised fruit, and lightning braided lace across the mountains. In that terrible elegance, some saw the theater of ruin. Others saw a stage setting itself for an author not yet at her desk. The lake gathered the storm like a confidant. Waves rehearsed whispers against the shore, and the villa listened with its many windows. Lamps conjured islands of warmth inside, while the mountains wore their masks of thunder. The house felt borrowed from a dream, a stage awaiting its players. Byron paced like a rumor in silk and shadow, laughter cutting the dark like glass. Percy spoke in torrents, ideas flashing like heat lightning behind his eyes. Polidori measured the room with a physician's brow, pocketing other men's tempests for later weather. Wine and argument braided themselves like ivy. Mary sat where the window divided her from the lake, the storm transcribing itself upon the glass. Grief had marked her, but so had fire. In her gaze lived the stubborn architecture of thought, a scaffold no wind could topple. Ink waited patiently for its future blood. A dare arose the way thunder does, sudden and inevitable. "Tell a tale to chill the bones," Byron said, and his smile recruited the candles. They obliged, trembling with interest. Each guest became a lighthouse in their chair, casting a fragile beam across the whistling dark. Outside, a white road of lightning crossed the water, and the mountains blinked awake. The villa tightened its cloak of stone. Whatever story would be born here was already walking the corridors, barefoot, carrying a borrowed spark, looking for a body to inhabit. They talked of ghosts the way surgeons talk of veins, mapping the routes fear takes through a body. German tales shuffled into the room like nervous porters. Italian rumors sat down uninvited. The conversation grew a pulse, then a fever. Shadows lengthened to eavesdrop with interest. Electricity entered like a new theology. Frog's legs had twitched under Galvani's needle. Aldini had coaxed grimaces from the recently dead. Sparks wore the arrogance of revelation. If lightning could persuade flesh to perform, what sermon could be preached to the sleeping heart? The candle flames nodded like scholars. Percy's hands conducted invisible choirs of thought, while Byron tightened the argument's laces. Polidori arranged skepticism into neat stacks and still left room for terror. Mary gathered every thread without touching the spool, weaving silence into a net. Outside, thunder solved nothing and proved everything. The glass chimed with rain as if the lake were typing its disagreement. The air smelled faintly of metal, as though the night had been hammered to a thin sheet and wrapped around the villa for warmth. If God's spark could be imitated, then where did wonder end and trespass begin? That question paced the rug until it wore a path. It looked at Mary with the intimate curiosity of a confessor and asked to be written. Sleep loosened its knots and let the vision through. A chamber opened like an eye in the dark. On the slab lay a body assembled from promises and theft. Beside it knelt a student of unhallowed arts, pale with devotion, terrified of his own prayer. The spark did not roar. It whispered. Fingers remembered their duty. Lids auditioned the idea of night and rejected it. The chest rehearsed the ancient script and found its line. The room contracted around that first breath, the way a mouth shapes a forbidden word. Mary woke with knowledge pressed against her ribs like a smuggled relic. It was more than a ghost story. It was a mirror and a verdict. Creation without love had a face, and it was learning how to look back. She reached for ink as if for air. Morning did not cancel the night. Rain wrote its signature along the eaves. The lake wore its bruise with elegance. In that grey baptism, Mary began to name the unnamed. Maker and made, duty and denial, fire borrowed from heaven and debt that never sleeps. The student would flee his success. The creature would inherit the cold. Between them would stretch a road of fur and ice, and on that road we would follow. For in the dark origin of this invention lay the map of our own unguarded hearts. The 16th century cracked the body open like a book. In Amsterdam and Padua, anatomy theatres filled with curious faces, their benches stacked high as an altar. Surgeons became priests of revelation, peeling away mysteries with a blade. Candles cast long sermons across the skin, and the audience leaned in, half in awe, half in dread. They dissected not just flesh, but certainty. The body, once guarded by faith, became a cathedral of nerves, tendons, and bone. Each incision whispered rebellion against silence. What had been sacred was now spectacle, where death taught lessons to the living and ghosts attended in disguise. Students scribbled diagrams, ink trembling as much as the knife. Margins swelled with questions. What animates this form? Where does warmth flee when breath is stolen? The corpse answered only with stillness, yet the air seemed charged with unfinished sentences. In these rooms, science was born not from clean light, but from shadow. 1,000 whispered breaths, 1,000 held silences, conspired to make knowledge from the scandal of display. From the dead, they harvested a strange promise, that secrets, once shown, might someday be mastered. The theatre of anatomy rehearsed the stage for another drama, the dream of reanimation, of summoning movement from stillness. And though no one yet spoke it, the silence between scalpel and ink foreshadowed the lightning bolt to come. In Bologna, lightning leapt into the lecture hall. Luigi Galvani pricked the leg of a frog, and it danced though no soul stirred within. The audience gasped, as if a ghost had answered a question unspoken. Muscles twitched at the touch of metal, and the body's silence cracked with a borrowed spark. Here was no ordinary dissection. Here was demonstration that life might be persuaded to mimic itself. Brass hooks and damp flesh became a strange duet, conducting invisible currents. To some, this was proof of divine fire hiding in sinew. To others, it was blasphemy disguised as science. The frog's jump haunted more than students. It haunted philosophers, poets, dreamers who now saw flesh as clay awaiting thunder. The natural world became an instrument, and electricity its hymn. Every twitch was a prophecy, every convulsion a rehearsal for man's bold trespass. Galvani claimed he had discovered animal electricity. He argued that the body carried its own spark, that life was not breathed only by God, but wound into flesh itself. The idea spread like fire in dry fields, carried by pamphlets, parodied in drawings, feared in sermons. Each experiment was a pebble cast into a deep lake. Ripples crossed years, reaching minds that would never set foot in Bologna. Among them was a young woman who would inherit the echo of these frogs and fashion it into a monster that never died. If frogs twitched, what might a man do? Giovanni Aldini, Galvani's nephew, asked the question aloud. In London, before a crowd, he answered it with a corpse. Wires kissed the dead flesh, sparks leapt, and arms rose like puppets startled awake. Gasps rippled through the gallery like a second current. The dead man's jaw worked, as if rehearsing words he no longer owned. One eye opened, rolling white under the lash of voltage. The chest convulsed like a storm breaking against ribs. Spectacle became sacrament. Horror became sermon. London did not forget what it saw that day. Some cried miracle, some cried blasphemy. The papers carried the tale into parlors and pubs. Was death not final? Could artifice usurp eternity? In laughter, rumors, and fear, Aldini's name became inseparable from his show, the conjurer of unwilling breath. But what he gave was not life. It was parody. The corpse danced on strings of lightning, but no thought stirred behind the grimaces. The spark proved power, not resurrection. Yet that power was enough to intoxicate those who yearned to cheat the grave. Among the watchers, whether in London or in print, were dreamers who took this pageant as prologue. They would write not of frogs or corpses, but of a being who asked its maker for love and cursed him when denied. Electricity was not confined to wires. It stormed into thought. Philosophers debated whether man was a machine, whether soul was spark or smoke. The salons of Paris echoed with Voltairean irony, while London pulpits thundered against new gods of science. In every argument, the frog twitched again. Materialists claimed life was chemistry, gears and fluids arranged in elegant secrecy. Vitalists swore something extra, an élan vital, breathed into clay by divine fingers. Neither side won, but the quarrel kept the lamp of curiosity burning. Into that flame, Mary Shelley carried her own tinder. The young listened more keenly than their elders, for youth sees less danger in trespass and more glory in new maps. Percy Shelley spoke of electricity as if it were poetry, lightning as scripture yet to be written. His words would help fuel the fire in Mary's vision. The spark became a metaphor as well as a tool. Revolution itself was described in lightning strokes. Ideas leapt from Paris to Geneva, from lab to parlor, like thunder rolling across borders. If sparks could leap nerves, why not nations? If they could animate frogs, why not literature? And so the philosophy of the spark traveled beside the science. Each informed the other, weaving thunderclouds of possibility. Mary inherited not a lab bench, but a storm where science and dream clashed, and in the crash, she found her story's heartbeat. All science of the age was shadowed by one myth: Prometheus, thief of fire. To some, electricity was that stolen flame, carried by men who dared rival gods. To others, it was divine gift, a torch to guide progress through the night of ignorance. Mary Shelley knew both interpretations. She saw in Prometheus not only triumph, but punishment. The Titan chained to rock, his liver torn daily, was kin to any mortal who overreached. Ambition invited torment, as surely as night invited dreams. The spark was promise and curse, a marriage of wonder and dread. Mary's imagination married myth to experiment. In her vision, Victor Frankenstein became a new Prometheus, brilliant, reckless, punished. His creature, fire-born yet abandoned, was the consequence. In this myth reforged, science was altar, ambition priest, the monster both child and nurse. What she inherited was more than news of frogs or corpses. She inherited centuries of human fear that knowledge might outgrow its master. The spark, whether in myth or in wire, was not simply light, it was a mirror, and in its reflection, mankind always saw its shadow. The Prometheus of Shelley's tale would live beyond his chains, not in stone or fire, but in books, in films, in the dark imagination of ages yet unborn. And the borrowed fire would never again be hidden. Before laboratories, there was a mountain and a thief. Prometheus stole flame for man, teaching the dark to retreat. But gods keep ledgers. They chained him to a rock where daylight bled into grievance, and each noon the eagle clocked in to carve the debt. Mercy was not part of the contract. This myth smoldered beneath every candle in Europe. Fire was warmth, but also verdict. Knowledge, but also summons. To tame lightning was to rattle Olympus with a mortal hand. Even priests of progress felt the tremor. Every torch carried a shadow equal to its light. The Greeks told punishment to warn ambition where cliff becomes air. Yet men kept climbing. Curiosity is a kind of wing, stitched from questions. It flies even when storms petition it to land. The mind prefers peril to silence, and the heart mistakes daring for destiny. Prometheus is not merely a tale. He is a diagram of consequence. He teaches that gift and wound may be the same object handed two ways. He proves that the greatest prisons carry our fingerprints. His chain is the sentence of the Maker upon himself. Mary Shelley looked at the Titan and saw a reflection, a creator outpacing conscience, a flame borrowed without a covenant to tend it. She understood that some victories arrive as indictments, and that the most dangerous altar is the one we build within. Victor Frankenstein learns the world by taking it apart. He follows blood like a red road and nerves like silver threads through night. Books become ladders, ladders become roofs, and from that height he mistakes horizon for permission. Genius is a beautiful liar when it whispers only you can. He bargains with hours, pawning sleep for a chance at thunder. Friends fade into fog. Letters gather dust. Seasons miss their cue. In the theater of his skull, applause never ceases. The laboratory blooms like a winter flower, fed by solitude and the fertilizer of stolen time. The work seduces because it does not argue. Metal obeys, glass listens, flesh, dead and quiet, makes no demands until it does. Victor tells himself he is midwife to knowledge, that suffering will be repaid in crowns. He edits the word responsibility out of every sentence. But assent has a geometry. The higher you climb, the less you hear. Warnings are wind at altitude. Love is weather at sea level. He tightens the last wire and discovers that triumph without witness feels like a crime scene waiting for sirens. He thinks he is rising like Prometheus. He is descending like Icarus, except the feathers are sutures and the sun is a key turned in a lock. The door opens, the room inhales. Something on the table remembers how to be. The boundary between wonder and trespass is not a wall, but a shiver. Victor mistakes it for excitement and calls it progress. He courts the storm as if it were an accomplice, and the storm, being indifferent, signs with lightning and leaves the sentence to him. He collects parts with a bureaucrat's calm and a poet's denial. Names vanish. Donors dissolve into measurements. He calls the body a project to avoid calling it a person. Language performs anesthesia while the conscience waits outside, pacing without a coat. The tremor comes before the spark, the way a confession sometimes enters the room before the guilty. Glass rattles. The wires hum their psalm. In that chorus, humility is the only voice unheard. He tells himself there will be time to love the result once it breathes. Trespass is not only entering forbidden ground, it is departing duty. Victor leaves his post the moment the eyes open. Fear ruins the coronation. He crowns himself with absence, abdicates into a hallway, and returns to find the kingdom staring back, unadvised and unaddressed. The first movement of the creature is a miracle. The second is an indictment. Creation is a door, Responsibility is the hinge. He built the door. He forgot the hinge. It opens its eyes into a room that runs away. The first knowledge it receives is retreat. Walls step back. Footsteps flee. The maker subtracts himself. What remains is a ceiling that won't answer, and a language of cold. Its hands are new moons learning their orbit. Its breath is a thief returning what winter stole. It does not know its name, only the commandment of heartbeat. The world is too bright and then too dark. The sequence is wrong. The script is missing lines. Birth is supposed to be a duet. This is a solo sung to stone. The creature reaches, and the room offers metal. It stands, and the future sits down somewhere else. In that arithmetic, loneliness divides faster than love can multiply. It seeks the maker with a loyalty inherited from need. Loyalty without welcome becomes hunger with teeth. The hallway delivers no farther, only distance measured in doorways. Night places its cold hand upon a newborn brow and calls it education. Some tragedies begin loud. This one begins with a quiet that kills louder than thunder. The first kindness it learns is gravity. The first law, abandonment. Victor flees into narrative like a witness rewriting the scene. He tells himself terror absolves love. That genius outranks nurture. But creation is a promise with teeth. It will not release the hand that feeds it absence. His future will be measured in pursuits and graves. He dreams of erasing the creature from the ledger of his life, but ink dries harder than regret. Names he cherishes begin to vanish in concentric circles. Brother, friend, bride. The monster learns grammar from grief and conjugates revenge with fluency. Debt accrues interest when ignored. The longer he delays responsibility, the more expensive mercy becomes. Each refusal compounds into a sentence. Each uplance adds a flaw to the scaffold. When at last he listens, the wind speaks in the creature's voice. Prometheus accepted chains he could not break. Victor builds chains he refuses to see. One is punished by gods, the other by consequences made in man's image. The myth survives because both are true in us, theft of fire and failure to warm what we've lit. Thus the title Mary chose becomes verdict and prophecy. The modern Prometheus is not merely Victor's name. It is a mirror held to any age that dares to kindle without covenant. The flame arrives. The bill follows. It flees into a world that names it monster before it learns language. Forests become classrooms, rivers its mirrors, and fire its cruel tutor. Hunger is a grammar without patience. Cold is a teacher without mercy. It discovers that survival is a dictionary written in scars. Children scream, women faint, men seize stones. Every village is a courtroom, and every verdict is cast before trial. It learns to read the human face and finds only mirrors that fracture at its reflection. The earth allows it to sleep, but man denies it welcome. Animals regard it without judgment. Birds sing over its shoulders, unafraid. Wolves watch from tree lines with suspicion, but not disgust. Among beasts it feels less alien than among brothers. It begins to envy the mute covenant between claw and soil. Shelter is borrowed from caves, warmth begged from flames that both feed and bite. Fire offers bread and burns fingers alike. It learns to cradle it as one might cradle a dangerous child, necessary, dazzling, never to be trusted. The lesson brands deeper than the scars it leaves. So begins the education of exile. Each kindness withheld carves another sentence into its memory. The world speaks to it in rejections. Its first true voice will be born not from words, but from wounds. The cottage is discovered like a scripture waiting to be read. Behind hedges it watches a family. Father blind, children weary, yet kind. Their chores are symphonies of patience. Their bread is divided even when scarce. Their grief is quiet but shared. To the creature, this becomes gospel. It listens through walls, stealing syllables. Sounds are shaped into sense, sense into yearning. Each word is a step toward a bridge never built. Language blooms in silence, like ivy clinging to stone. The creature learns not only to speak, but to ache. Through stolen hours, it discovers storybooks. Histories and poems become surrogate parents. Milton teaches it to wrestle with God. Plutarch teaches it to wrestle with men. In every page it searches for a reflection. In every margin it finds absence. Love, witnessed but not tasted, becomes famine sharper than hunger. It rehearses greetings in whispers, practicing smiles in the mirror of water. When kindness is imagined long enough, it risks being mistaken for entitlement. The creature's hope swells like a dam about to burst. It waits for courage to replace fear, for the moment when shadow steps into hearth light. Education, however, is not preparation. Knowledge sharpens wounds. When the door finally opens, the silence that follows is not welcome. It is recoil. It speaks, and the words shatter. The blind father listens, but the children see. Fear overrides every syllable. Kindness dissolves in the acid of sight. Stones replace greetings. Fire replaces hearth. Hope dies loudly in a language it had only just learned. In this moment, the creature learns its true name. Exile, not because it chooses solitude, but because solitude is nailed to its shadow. Rejection is not event, but identity, grafted into marrow. The village that never knew it still defines it. Its hunger now wears a mask of rage. The appetite for bread is consumed by an appetite for justice, and justice is twisted by grief into vengeance. It looks into rivers and sees not reflection, but accusation. Each ripple whispers, unwanted. Loneliness is a kiln. Into it go fragments of hope and love. Out of it comes a harder substance, wrath. The creature does not plan to kill, it plans to balance. Yet balance is a blade sharpened on both sides, and it cannot choose which way it cuts. Thus it begins walking not as a student, but as a plaintiff, carrying a case against its maker. Every step is both pilgrimage and indictment. And in the silence between footfalls, the verdict is already written. It finds Victor and does not strike. Instead, it speaks. The words astonish both, the creatures for their fluency, Victor's for their cruelty. It asks not for riches or crowns, but for kinship. A companion, shaped from the same rejection, stitched from the same night. Its argument is courtroom logic. You owe what you made. It tells Victor that happiness denied will ferment into vengeance. It bargains in syllables carved from grief. Victor hears only threat disguised as plea. Creator and created exchange sentences, but each word is weighted like iron. It imagines another hand to hold, another gaze to mirror. To walk without hearing screams, to speak without watching recoil. Love becomes not luxury, but oxygen. To be denied is to drown. Victor hesitates, trapped between horror and guilt. To refuse is to summon vengeance. To agree is to multiply dread. Yet he signs the unholy contract with a nod. The promise will not survive the storm, but for now, it binds them both. This is not a request. It is confession as demand. I will be gentle if you let me. I will be ruin if you refuse. The future trembles in the grammar of that choice. Victor begins but cannot complete. The second creature lies unfinished, parts abandoned, like thoughts too dangerous to finish. He fears multiplying horror more than fulfilling his word. His conscience shifts weight from promise to prevention. He calls it morality. The creature calls it betrayal. The destruction is witnessed. Rage blooms where hope had briefly lived. It does not roar, it vows. To tear joy from Victor as joy was torn from it. To make absence contagious. The oath is written not in blood, but in subtraction. Each beloved face will vanish. What follows is not slaughter, but arithmetic. Brother, friend, bride, each becomes a number in an equation of grief. The creature tallies balance with precision, teaching Victor that the cost of abandonment is paid in installments, never in full. Victor, terrified, calls it monster. But the creature calls itself mirror. He birthed not an abomination, but an answer. The fury that follows is not mindless. It is ledger, pen in hand, inked with rage that never dries. Thus the trial shifts venue. No longer in courts or villages, but in the unlit corridors between two shadows, bound forever by creation and us. Death writes its summons in the margins of Victor's life. Brother strangled, bride silenced, friend lost to shadow. Each name becomes a beacon, each grave a signpost. Vengeance replaces study, grief replaces wonder. Victor picks up chains and calls them justice. The creature does not hide, it beckons. Each clue is deliberate. Footprints in snow, whispers in villages, letters that read like baited hooks. It wants pursuit as much as Victor wants retribution. Maker and maid circle each other like wolves pacing a cage with no door. Storms carry their feud across borders. Mountains echo it, rivers repeat it, seas try to drown it. But the quarrel resurfaces, heavier each time. The chase becomes a liturgy. Crime answered by vow, vow answered by another crime. Victor tells himself this is justice, but he knows it is marriage. The creature is the spouse he cannot divorce, the shadow that insists upon ceremony. He is widowed and yet wed, pursued and yet bound to pursue. No grave grants release. So he begins to follow into places no map welcomes. And with each step, the world narrows until only two remain. The hunter and the hunted, changing roles with every breath. The chase rakes across mountains of Switzerland, through forests of Germany, over frozen rivers in Russia. Villages whisper of a giant moving by night, stealing food, leaving silence. Victor follows with fevered breath, body breaking, will unbroken. Each land becomes stage scenery. Cathedrals loom and vanish. Markets turn ghostly behind him. Victor no longer belongs to countries or kin. He belongs only to pursuit. Maps blur, and compass points collapse into a single vector. Forward. The creature's traces are cruel in precision. Fires still warm when Victor arrives, carcasses skinned, shelter abandoned minutes before. It is not merely leading him, it is feeding him, ensuring the chase never dies. Mercy and cruelty blur into one gesture. Locals offer warning, sometimes pity, but pity cannot attach to obsession. Victor's eyes carry the same weather as the skies, perpetual storm, perpetual hunger. He is less man now than blade, honed only to cut one target. In taverns, sailors whisper about the man and the thing he follows. Two legends walk before their eyes, yet neither asks to be believed. The hunt is theatre performed only for itself. Ice replaces road, and silence replaces forest. The Arctic becomes judge, jury, executioner. Winds howl like verdicts written across endless white. Victor drives dogs until they collapse, then stumbles forward himself, haunted more by footsteps behind than before. The creature thrives where Victor starves. It eats raw, sleeps little, waits until waits long. It is more native to exile than the man who made it. Each mile reverses creation. The maker diminishes. The made grows sovereign. Hunger claws Victor. Cold gnaws bone. Yet fury insulates. He whispers curses through frozen teeth, syllables breaking like glass. He believes vengeance is worth every frost-bitten finger, every drop of blood turned ice. The pursuit has become religion, and the altar stretches endless. The Arctic is mirror and accomplice. Its wastes reflect the hollow inside both hunter and hunted. Here the world agrees with their quarrel. Nothing grows, nothing forgives. Some journeys end in return. This one insists on horizon without edge. Each night, Victor sleeps closer to myth. Each day, the creature writes another stanza in their shared scripture of pursuit. Captain Robert Walton enters the tale by accident, but remains by destiny. His ship, locked in Arctic jaws, becomes witness to a myth unfolding. His letters to England carry the frost-bitten confession of Victor Frankenstein, a man reduced to story even before death. Walton is both narrator and mirror. His ambition to conquer polar seas echoes Victor's ambition to conquer death. The parallel frightens him, but fascination chains him closer. He watches genius rot into obsession, and he trembles at the reflection in his own chest. Victor recounts with fever and fire. Each sentence is a will, each pause a gravestone. Walton writes furiously, as if the ink might thaw the man. But paper cannot rescue flesh. The confession is prophecy. Learn from me, if not by my precepts, then by my example. Walton sees the creature at last, grief draped and vast against the ice. For a moment, pity outweighs terror. This is not a beast, but an orphaned fury, mourning the master it both hated and loved. The hunter is dead, and the hunted refuses victory. Thus the tale passes to Walton, then to us. Frankenstein becomes scripture not by design, but by witness. Men dying, words surviving. The creature declares itself finished. Its maker lies still, its revenge complete yet empty. What remains is silence heavier than triumph. It vows to end itself, to climb into funeral pyre or drift into northern dark until no bone remains. Walton listens, torn between horror and sympathy. He sees not a monster, but the echo of man's ambition, twisted by neglect. He cannot decide if this being deserves damnation or dirge. The creature answers with departure, not waiting for verdict. It steps onto the ice and walks into myth. Snow swallows footprints as quickly as they are made. The sea accepts without question. Horizon folds its last silhouette into storm. What survives is not flesh, but warning. That creation without compassion becomes curse. That ambition without responsibility is fire stolen but never shared. That every victor writes a creature, and every creature leaves a trail of mirrors behind. So the Arctic keeps its secret, and history keeps the story. We call it Frankenstein, but what we mean is ourselves. The tale of Frankenstein does not die with its author. It shifts shape across centuries, stitched from the fears of each generation. From pamphlets and penny dreadfuls to stages and silent films, the creature is remade again and again, carrying its restless shadow forward into history. Sometimes green-skinned, sometimes silent, sometimes portrayed as tragic hero or villain. The creature becomes an actor, forever trapped in costume. Yet beneath every disguise, the pulse is unchanged, whispering the same question through centuries. What horror follows when creation is abandoned? Mary's vision, born in thunder and grief, exceeded her own century. Translations carried it into foreign tongues, while new technologies dressed it in fresh disguises. Industrial chimneys became lightning rods, laboratories replaced castles, yet the myth remained as familiar as a face in the mirror. Each retelling carved new scars, but preserved the living core. Frankenstein is not a tale that concludes with one book. It is reborn whenever men and women confront their inventions, fearing the shadows that rise behind their brightest sparks, and wondering if they will survive them. The myth is both parasite and prophecy. It mutates but does not vanish. Every generation supplies new lightning. Every reader supplies new flesh. Frankenstein waits not in the grave of fiction, but in the living heartbeat of ambition, a reminder that creation always comes with shadow. At its core, Frankenstein is less about lightning than loneliness. The creature is every exile cast from the circle, every stranger turned away from warmth. It is a hymn to the outsider, sung in silence, amplified by rejection, a song that echoes across centuries and cultures without fading. Readers recognize themselves in the stitched skin. Not only scientists saw reflection in the monster's wounds, but also the abandoned, the orphaned, and the judged. Frankenstein offered a vocabulary for grief that had no language, whispering to Thor, them that they were not alone in being unwanted. The monster became mirror for the excluded, an image they could claim as both curse and testimony. Some saw in it only warning, others consolation, and still more prophecy. But all saw themselves, and that recognition burned with truth more than lightning ever could. The outsider is not invention, but reflection. Mary's creation merely gave shape to what people already felt in secret. The fear of being unloved, the rage of being unseen. The stitched body became a shorthand for every soul stitched together by pain. Thus the creature endures, not because it terrifies, but because it understands. It survives because its exile is universal. To be human is to stand at the edge of the firelight, and Frankenstein teaches that in that shadow you are never truly alone. Every age returns to Frankenstein and asks, what have we made? Factories that smother cities, weapons that split nations, machines that begin to think. Each invention is another stitched body. Each discovery, another spark of lightning waiting to awaken consequences we cannot predict. The story reminds us, science is not the villain, nor is imagination the crime. It is neglect that is monstrous. The terror lies in abandoning what we create, in casting aside what we have called into being. That abandonment is the heart of Mary's warning. Nuclear fire, genetic editing, artificial minds, all carry the shadow of Frankenstein's prophecy. The myth does not live only in novels or films, but in headlines, laboratories, and the fears of those who wonder what their creations might one day become. Frankenstein was never Victor's alone. It belongs to all who stand before new discoveries with trembling hands, uncertain whether they build salvation or ruin. Each test tube, each circuit, each gene spliced carries the ghost of the stitched figure waiting in the dark. Thus the tale does not fade, but sharpens. It returns as blueprint and prophecy, a haunting voice reminding us that creation without care is curse, and that invention demands responsibility as fierce as food demands fuel. That is the question every maker must answer. Not all readings end in terror. Some light candles instead of torches. Feminists reclaim the creature as daughter denied. Queer voices claim it as body unloved. Artists transform it into symbol of survival. Frankenstein becomes not warning, but witness, not curse, but anthem of endurance. The scars become badges, the stitches survival. To call it monster is to call its inheritors monsters too. They answer by embracing the title, saying yes, and we endure. In the wound, they discover strength no fire or hatred can destroy. Mary's lightning becomes fire turned outward, fueling art and protest. From stages to screens to demonstrations, the stitched hand rises not for vengeance, but testimony. It is survival made visible, a voice for those told they should not exist yet continue. The creature is not only horror, it is heritage. Those who were cast aside find family in its shadow. The myth becomes not a weapon against them, but one they wield, shaping it into banner, shield, and torch of their own making. Thus Frankenstein lives not only as warning, but as rebellion. It survives in those who refuse erasure, who turn shame into symbol, who transform curse into chorus. The stitched body speaks in scars, and those scars write the language of survival. Frankenstein closes, but it never ends. Each age adds new lightning. Each reader adds new flesh. The tale walks with us into every laboratory, every storm, every dream where ambition and fear share the same room. It waits quietly until called forth again. The story does not ask if monsters exist. It asks who is the maker and what debt remains unpaid. The answers shift with time, but the mirror does not break. In its glass, every generation sees its own reflection staring back. Storm nights and silent laboratories repeat the same script. The creature opening its eyes, the maker running, the silence that follows. These are not scenes of fiction, but echoes of the human condition, patterns replayed wherever creation meets neglect. Frankenstein is not only book or legend. It is question eternal, stitched into science, carved into art, burned into imagination. To read it is to hold a mirror that asks whether our hands have shaped monsters or merely uncovered truths. And when thunder speaks, it is not only sky but Mary's voice, daring us still to face the shadow, to recognize ourselves in the stitched body, and to remember that the truest horror is not the creature, but our own reflection.